starts coming through on the live feed.
The live feed has started, Owen.
That's lovely. Mr. Chairman, over to you.
Thank you very much indeed. So good evening, everyone, both those who are panelists and those who are guests tonight, and anyone who is watching this live or maybe watching in future days or weeks or months to come. My name is Councillor Kevin Bentley and I'm the chairman of the scrutiny panel, but tonight we sit as the crime and disorder panel, which meets on an annual basis or whenever it's necessary to have an update from partners across the entire borough who work to make sure we are kept safe and people around us are kept safe as well. I will go around to each of the panel members. I will call their name and ask them to introduce themselves. I will then go to our panelists tonight and ask them to introduce themselves as well. When I do so, perhaps I can ask you to switch your cameras on when you are introducing yourselves and anytime you're speaking. Could you please also make sure that you keep yourselves muted, except for Mr. Howell and myself during the course of the meeting, and only unmute when you're called upon to speak. And for members, we are going to have the presentation, then we will ask questions afterwards. Please could you indicate in the usual manner by raising the electronic hand and we will come to you. And both I will be watching out, as will Mr. Howell and other Democratic Services officers, to make sure you're not missed in any shape or form. We're also joined tonight by Councillor Mike Lilly, who's the Cabinet Member responsible for this area, and he'll introduce himself as we go round. So you've heard from me. Let me go next then in the order that I can see people, for Councillor Dave Harris.
Good evening, Chair. It's Councillor Dave Harris from Beerchurch, substituting for Councillor Tina Bourne. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Chris Hayter.
Good evening, Councillor Chris Hayter from St John's End Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Sam McCarthy.
Good evening, Councillor Sam McCarthy, and I represent Shrub End Ward.
Okay. Councillor Paul Dundas.
Good evening, Councillor Paul Dundas, Stanway Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Mike Hogg.
Good evening, Councillor Mike Hogg from St Anne's and St John's Wards.
And Councillor Lorcan Whitehead.
Good evening, Councillor Lorcan Whitehead representing Newtown and Christchurch Ward.
The Deputy Chair will be joining us shortly. Councillor Lewis Barber, when he arrives, I'll just pause things so he can introduce himself to the meeting and those who are watching and listening as well. Councillor Mike Lee, could I just ask you to introduce yourself and in your capacity you're here this evening, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Councillor Mike Lilly, I'm the Cabinet Member for Communities, Wellbeing and Public Safety.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask our senior officer who's responsible for this area as well to introduce herself. I will then go around each of our panellists. So, Pam Donnelly.
Thank you, Councillor Bentley. Good evening, everyone. My name is Pam Donnelly and I'm the Chair of the Safer Colchester Partnership.
Thank you. I will go round in the order I've got the names on a list for no other reason than that. And as I said, when I come to your name, can I ask you please just to switch on your camera so when you're introducing yourself or when you are speaking. So we'll go to Pam Green first.
Apologies for the delay in getting my camera on. I'm Pam Green, I'm Chief Operating Officer of the North East Essex CCG.
Thank you very much. And Lee Bailey.
Good evening, I'm Lee Bailey, Lead for Partnerships for Children and Families, Essex County Council in the North.
Thank you very much indeed. And Dave Messam. I'll just come back to David there in a second. Jenny Gibson.
Hello, Jenny Gibson, Manager for the North Essex Community Rehabilitation Company.
Thank you. Just remind you when you're speaking, could I ask please for your camera to go on so people can see you. Chief Inspector Rob Huddleston.
Good evening, everyone. Chief Inspector Rob Huddleston, Essex Police District Commander for Colchester.
Thank you very much indeed. I've just seen Dave Messam pop up. So, David, could you just introduce yourself, please?
Yes, my apologies. Good evening, everyone. David Messam, Head of North Essex National Probation Service.
Thank you. Melanie Ruddle. Rundle, sorry.
Good evening, Chair. Apologies, my video is not working at the moment. I'm awaiting my IT guru to return home from work. Melanie Rundle, Safety and Protection Manager, Colchester Borough Council.
Lovely, thank you very much. Don't worry in that case. If it's technical difficulties, don't worry, of course. Sonia Carr.
Yeah, good evening, Sonia Carr, Community Safety and Safeguarding at Colchester Borough Council.
Thank you. I did have Simon Debnam, but I believe he's an apology. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
As an additional guest, we have Karen Lohman's just joined us from Colchester Borough Homes.
So Karen, that's what I can hear from you, please. Thank you.
I think she's just joined this
Okay, well, we'll come
in
back
the last
to
few
Karen.
seconds. So.
Yeah, don't worry, we'll come back to Karen. Do we have Patrick Higgs? Let's see him down here.
Don't think we do, Mr. Chairman.
All right, well, perhaps we could try and chase him if that's possible. Karen, are you able to connect and tell us who you are? Well, we know who you are, but for the sake of formality.
Hi, yeah, good evening. I'm Karen Lohman, Director of Housing from Colchester Borough Homes.
Lovely, thank you very much indeed. I think we've spoken to everyone. I will just ask Mr. and Ms. Mooney just to introduce themselves as our democratic officers, please. And Matthew Evans as well, starting with Mr. Howell.
Owen Howell, Democratic Services Officer and Clerk for the committee.
Thank you. Ms. Mooney.
Hello, Chairman, Democratic Services Officer. Just in the background. Thank you.
Don't worry, thank you. And Mr. Evans.
Good evening, Chair. Matthew Evans, Democratic Services Officer, same as Jan.
Lovely, thank you. I always think it's important that when you do Zoom meetings, when you're not physically in the room, everyone knows who's taking part, and we all have a very important part to play here. Right, we just have a few bits of housekeeping to go through, so bear with me before we get into the main function of the meeting. We've heard about substitutions. We have Councillor Dave Harris, Councillor Tina Borden. That has been done. There are no urgent items. May I ask the panel members or any member of the authority if they have any declarations of interest, which you can declare at any time.
Chairman, Councillor Mike Hogg, could I declare an interest, a non-pecuniary interest as a licensee and holder of a personal licence for a registered charity?
Lovely, thank you. Are there any other declarations of interest from members of the authority? Thank you, Ashley. So if you think of anything, just raise your hand and we will come to it and record it as time goes on. I think I should just, I always do, sometimes I'm told not to, but I always do safety declare that I am a member of Essex County Council as the authority. Either is represented or certainly will be mentioned, I'm sure, during the course of this evening. Thank you. Item number 5 is minutes from the previous meeting. That's not the previous scrutiny meeting, that's the previous meeting of this panel, which was a year ago. I wasn't present. I think 1 or 2 people were. For those people who were present, may I just ask whether these meetings are agreed? And please be forceful in your answer.
Agreed.
No, Chair, because the minutes actually say you were present.
Oh, do they?
You weren't.
I wasn't present. I wasn't there. Never mind.
No, but they say you were.
Oh, well, look, subject to that minor change, I certainly wasn't. I know. So thank you. Thank you for spotting that, Councillor Dundas.
Okay.
Other than that, are they an outstandingly accurate record?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just quickly whiz us through there for a name vote, as I know Richard Clifford would advise that we should.
Oh yes, I
do it
forgot.
formally.
Sorry. Yes, you're quite right, because I, of course, thought we have no votes tonight, but it is a vote technically. So, Mr. Howell, could you administer the vote, please?
Yep, certainly. Okay, so I'll just take us through the committee members asking in name order to give a vote for, against, or to abstain the approval of the minutes. So Councillor Barber, I don't believe is with us yet,
nope.
Although he will be joining us as soon as he's able to. Councillor Bentley.
Since we've established actually I wasn't present, I will not be voting.
Abstain. Councillor Dundas.
Agreed. Subject to that very minor revision.
Thank you, Councillor Dundas. Councillor Hayter.
Agree. For.
Thank you, Councillor Hayter. Councillor Harris, apologies.
I wasn't at that meeting. Is it okay for me to vote for? I mean, or do I not vote?
You
Well,
can
I
if
would
you wish.
advise. I would advise not voting because you weren't there. So it's difficult to say.
Not voting. Thank you, Chair.
Same as me.
Abstain. Councillor Hogg.
For.
Councillor Hogg 4. Councillor McCarthy.
4.
Councillor McCarthy 4. Councillor Whitehead.
4.
4. Thank you. So I make that the minutes have been approved, Mr. Chairman.
Very much indeed, and I'm just wallowing in the delight of being called a minor adjustment.
Councillor Barber's waiting to be let in.
Yes, yes. Sorry to interrupt, Chair. I've had a message as Councillor Hayter just said. Councillor Barber's trying to get in, I think. I think he's here.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, he's just arrived. He's not quite connected yet. Okay. Thank you. Right. Having done the previous minutes on the 10th of September, Councillor Barber is now here. Councillor Barber, we've just gone through the formalities at the beginning of the meeting, but could you please just introduce yourself for the purposes of everyone who's here?
Good evening. Apologies for my delay. I had bike-related issues coming home. My name is Councillor Lewis Barber, and I represent Lexington and Braeswood Ward.
Good. Okay, if it's rage, you might be in the right meeting then. Isn't it? Right. Okay. Item 6, I believe we have no. Oh, sorry, Mr. Howell.
Apologies, Mr. Chairman. Just as we're here, just wanted to check with Councillor Barber whether he had any interests that he'd like to declare for this.
Oh yes, thank you.
Meeting.
No interest as a fair.
That's lovely. Thank you, Councillor.
Right, item number 6, have your say. There are no have your say speakers, as I understand. So we'll go straight into the main part of this meeting, which is, I think, a very interesting and informative meeting. Looking forward to it enormously. I'm going to hand over now to Pam Donnelly. Pam.
Thank you, Councillor Bentley, and good evening, everyone. First of all, I just thought I'd run through how we'd like to present the information to you this evening, if we may. First of all, I'd like to thank one of our officers, Sonia Carr, for authoring the report that you have in front of you. Hopefully, most of you have had the chance to read it, and therefore I will take it as read. Once we've been through the report in very highlight detail, I'd like to hand over, if I may, to Councillor Lilly for a brief overview, and then to Chief Inspector Rob Huddleston, our Borough Commander here in Colchester. He will have a short presentation, and then of course we'll make sure at the end of that presentation there is time for questions from the panel, which is after all why we are here. So with regard to the report itself, you'll find that which tries to achieve a number of things. First of all, it describes the work of the partnership right the way through to this month, September 2020. It highlights in the report some changes that we've made. And I would draw your attention very notably to Appendix A, which sets out the work of the partnership and our partnership plan. And it highlights 3 key priorities. And in the past, for those of you who've attended these meetings before, will know that we've often had many more than 3 priorities. But I hope you'll agree when you get a chance to peruse them, that these represent absolutely that, our top 3 priorities for the community safety of the borough. It also sets out some actions that we have implemented over the last year to ensure those priorities are met. I'd also like the opportunity to refer you to Appendix B, and at the same time thank the partners who've contributed to that appendix. You'll find in there some detailed updates from all of our statutory partners. And not only do I want to thank them for their contribution to the report, but their attendance here this evening and their support for the committee throughout the year. Finally, in the report, you'll find a new addition, not surprisingly, given the challenging times we've had over the last few months since the global pandemic. You'll find a recovery plan for One Colchester. And that really is quite a noticeable change, because since the global pandemic, we started to embed the work of the Community Safety Partnership into the wider work of One Colchester, which includes a much broader group than those people who are formally required to be a member of the Community Safety Partnership and are with us this evening. I'll just give you an example of how that's been really helpful. So Food Bank, for example, you'll know how many of our residents in recent months have relied very heavily on the Food Bank. Age Concern is another example of a voluntary group who have provided an enormous amount of service to the residents of Colchester. And I'd notably like to make reference to the work of Community 360. Community 360 has acted as our community response arm for the Borough Council, and the great work that the Borough Council has been able to achieve through our very valued partners. There will be an opportunity later on this evening to dwell on some of the detail of those reports, but the main focus for this evening that we've agreed with the chair and the panel through your group spokespeople is to focus on the work of our police partners. And I put the emphasis on the word partners because all of us have worked very closely with the police in very recent months. And we really, truly are an excellent partnership here in Colchester. And I'd like to thank our inspector, our chief inspector, who's with us here this evening, for his leadership during this very difficult period. I'm not going to say any more about the report now. If you have questions on the report, we can come back to them at the end. I think it's preferable that I hand over now to Councillor Lilly, who will do a brief overview, and then hand over for the lion's share of this evening's work to Chief Inspector Huddleston, who will present his slideshow. So over now to Councillor Lilly. Thank you, Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Pam. Yes, it's been strange times where this time last year we were setting out the plans for the following year, but come the start of this year we had the coronavirus, so a lot of things changed, and we had different issues to deal with. But as Pam was saying, as the partnership, we actually work really, really well, and it sort of come to its fore, and we realised how many of those community groups were out there, and we also got them all together, led by 360, which is fantastic. Some of the issues that we faced, when we talk about county lines and the drug gangs, but it actually turned round. So we had the lockdown come in, the pubs closed, the nighttime economy went, the daytime economy went. We were told that most of the crime that we would deal with would be teenagers causing riot because they didn't have school, they were out all the times, but it didn't actually work out like that. It was the teenagers weren't the problem. It was actually the older people, 25 up, the issues of bonfires, barbecues, parties. So it changed completely. But and we had to deal with the fact that people were phoning in our noise team, but we couldn't communicate or go out and visit those places. But we put in place a warning letter system, and that worked really well. So it did change our working practices, and it also changed how we did things over the internet and dealt with stuff like that. But crime, obviously it did go down because there was nothing open, but the drug dealers still remained. They still were determined to carry on, and we were also dealing with the deprivation areas. So most of our work, we're really concentrated on partnership work and to deal with the food bank issues, people who are finding it hard to cope, and also working with our NHS partners as well, which obviously we needed. It was worrying times. But now we are, here we are, we're going back where the pubs and the clubs have opened again. And we've had a few issues. Of course, the main issue was what we were dealt with the coronavirus guidance was just that. It was just guidance. Our licensing officers had to visit over 400 places. There's only 3 of them in that department. And we could issue guidance on things. We were not the law. But I have to say that 90% of the licensed properties, they were really good. They actually cooperated because they wanted to open. They wanted to get their businesses up and running. We had a few people who weren't interested, but now they've all come on board. They've taken on the coronavirus guidelines and they're helping out. It's a different world. Some still persevere, but we do that. So everything has changed in that. So I think that this is probably a good opportunity to hand over to Chief Inspector Huddleston to give you a better oversight of the crime side. So over to you, Rob.
Thank you, Mike. Good evening, everybody. Apologies if my camera looks a bit strange. I have to use a mobile phone. The security on our Essex Police system won't let us access Zoom. But if I could ask Jan if you could share the slides on the screen, Jan, please. Hopefully you'll be able to see those. Fantastic, Jan. If we could move to the COVID update slide, please.
Jan, can we get the next slide, please?
Thank
Lovely,
you.
thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you. So I'll talk about COVID first. It presented and continues to present a unique set of challenges for us. The initial lockdown caused a drop in calls for service. And with courts closed, with our training cancelled, with officers cancelling leave because the holidays had been cancelled, we suddenly found we had more officers available than we've ever had before, which was a fantastic position to be in. Myself, the partnership, and John Evans, our community policing team lead, sat down and we put together a detailed patrol plan, primarily to protect those closed business premises where we knew businesses had been locked up and were therefore vulnerable, and to patrol areas where people might congregate. Essex Police centrally coordinated our response under a Gold Commander, and we set up a COVID response team to provide some direction, interpret the ever-changing guidance that was coming out, and make sure our officers had the correct PPE and plenty of it. We conducted extended disruption and reassurance patrols, engaging with members of the community that we saw out, and we started with and continue to use what we call a 4E approach, which is to engage, explain, encourage, and finally enforce if we have to gain compliance with regulations. But working across the communities during that period, our primary role was to provide reassurance and trust and build confidence. A lot of people were very scared, didn't really know what was going to happen, and it was a totally new situation to them. The key for us was around those hidden harms, that domestic abuse, those children that might be subject to abuse in the home, and how we could encourage reporting. So a lot of effort and a lot of work went into communicating from them. But as I said, our primary role was protection of life and property. We continued as a partnership, and the Town Centre Action Plan, TCAP, meetings continued to run virtually. And with partners, we put in place additional security in the town centre to protect retail premises through the bid team. And as the COVID regs changed, as a partnership, we planned the reopening of the town centre in terms of day and nighttime economy. And it's testament to our town centre that the initial risk assessments and plans for Lie and Walk were taken by the Essex-wide business crime team and shared as best practice all across Essex. So real kudos to the team there. We've also focused on our rural areas, and with licensing and through Pub Watch, worked with licensees across the district to prepare for the reopening of the nighttime economy. And as Councillor Lilly touched on, once reopened, the partnerships conducted enforcement visits throughout the district to ensure compliance with both health and licensing regulations. Together with the zone wardens and housing, we've continued to tackle antisocial behaviour. For example, at the Hythe around caravans and at Monkwick around repeat ASB linked to drugs at 2 premises where we got closure orders in place. But going forward, we're continuing to adapt. Staff in Essex Police who can work remotely continue to do so, ensuring that officers and staff who cannot work from home and need access to our stations can be in them. We've got a good supply of PPE and guidance to all officers and staff in order to stay safe. So once again this week we've seen further amendments to regulations, and we're still waiting some really clear legislative guidance. We've got already, I saw late last night, got some direction from our National Police Chiefs Council, but it always takes a couple of days for the legislation to be interpreted and fed down to us. But rest assured, we've got patrol plans in place, we've ring-fenced resources, and we've already commenced those patrols. Across the piece, we've worked hard to prevent crime and antisocial behaviour across the whole 12 months. And the comparison at the end of July showed that compared to the same period, 2018 to 2019, we'd recorded 521 less crimes. That's 521 less victims of crime in Colchester district. And some of the key areas for reduction: violence with injury, robbery, sexual offences, residential burglary, business burglary, hate crime, and of course shoplifting. I attribute the shoplifting down to the fact shops were shut for a long period of time. We've recorded 86 less incidents of antisocial behaviour and increased our uniform operational solved rate by 3.4%. That's an additional 611 victims who've had the offenders brought to justice. Jan, can we move on to the next slide, please? Thank you. So I want to talk through now around our 3 priorities, because whilst we've put in place all that additional work around COVID and continued the partnership work, our key priorities haven't changed. So through tackling gangs and county lines, we work as a wider partnership. We run something called a multi-agency coordination panel, which brings together a mix of statutory organisations and those with involvement in potential offenders. And what we take to that panel are those offenders that we know cause Colchester harm. And by each of us applying our own legislative powers, we can seriously disrupt those offenders. At the last Crime and Disorder panel, we talked about a maps and scored organised crime group that was operating in Colchester. Within the course of 12 months, that crime group's been dismantled, and 14 members of a crime group that was supplying large quantities of Class A drugs and some firearms into the east of England are either on remand or have been convicted. We continue to deploy regularly under the national knife crime operation of Operation Sceptre, providing high visibility, targeted disruption and reassurance patrols, combined with plainclothes patrols targeting those who we know carry weapons. The deployments are planned using an analytical tool where we identify hotspots from a variety of intelligence reports and crime reports, and we deploy into those areas utilising proactive policing powers to disrupt offenders. A lot of stop search. Excuse me. Since our last meeting, we've conducted 1,964 stop searches across Colchester District, and our positive outcome rate for that is 30.24%. So just over 1 in 3 people that we stop are either carrying a weapon, drugs, or items to commit crime. And key for me was monitoring, especially with the attention focus from the Black Lives Matter protests, how that affected our Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. To the end of July, the percentage of Black, Asian and minority ethnic members are 12.9% of those stops, which is roughly in line with what we forecast to be the demographic profile of Colchester. And the result of this, we've seen a fall in violence with injury offences, 423 less offences being recorded to the end of July 2020 for the same period to the end of July 2019. We've also seen a reduction of 416 offences of possession of offensive weapons and bladed articles compared to the previous 12 months, when there was little stop search but high levels of violence with injury. And we're continuing to respond to community concerns. And a really good example is from the work of the Riverside Residents Association. If you could move to the next slide for me, please, Jan. So we did some work in the area following a number of reports from the community about some drug dealing and some really antisocial behaviour. And it was really telling to be able to get this slide. It's not often I get letters from residents associations that set out so clearly. But the line I wanted to highlight and that I've put up on the slide, there's been a very visual police presence on the estate, and this has been noted by numerous residents. In terms of stop and search, it appears the dealers and customers have moved on, making the atmosphere on the estate a better and safer place to reside. And that's what we're aiming for, is to ensure that we can get that same feeling across the whole of Colchester District. Jan, thank you. If I can move on to the slide starting priority 2, please. So we continue to drive down antisocial behaviour and violent crime. And I've already spoken to you around how those figures have gone. But key for me coming out from COVID was the change in the reporting from the community. What we suddenly saw was empty roads and a minority of drivers treating them as a racetrack. And this caused real concern to our communities. And we've responded to that. Our entire community policing team has now been trained in the use of the latest TrueCam technology. And we're deploying that regularly at areas suggested by our community. And we're using social media and other channels to feed that back. But to give you some examples, Abberton Reservoir, where repeated car meets with car racing and antisocial driving cause misery for residents. We've deployed a number of operations, at one stage even put in place a dispersal order to prevent vehicles congregating. And we've seen much improvement in that area. Across the COVID lockdown, we started to see an emergence of, in particular, 3 off-road motorbikes being driven in the Middlewick Ranges area. And great work from the community for people responding and telling us about the bikes and where they were and the times. This led to us identifying the riders and actually linking them to drug activity, resulting in a warrant. 2 of the riders arrested for drug-related offences and 1 recalled to prison for a breach of his conditions. We continue to deploy those speed checks, and we're encouraging all of our community to feed those into us, either by responding to us on social media or using the Colchester Community Policing Team email. We're linking in with parish clerks to also explore opportunities, how we get more pertinent updates to local residents and businesses rather than just generic. And working with partners such as licensing and Colchester Borough Homes, we're continuing to tackle reports of antisocial behaviour from our communities. This has seen several closure orders put in place, preventing the use of premises by perpetrators of disorder. And our disruption of drug dealing, we combine with that to ensure that premises identified get closed down early. To provide further reassurance and ensure that our communities know what we're doing, we're reinvigorating our engagement events, such as socially distanced coffee with cops. And we've already put out 2 radio updates through Colne Radio, who've very kindly given us a little slot called On the Beat. And we're just about to record our 3rd update to go out to them. We've had, as we've already mentioned, some really good work with licensing. We've seen the SOS bus and the street pastors come back online to protect vulnerable people out in the evenings. We've seen really, really good interaction around those. And we've kept violent offences related to nighttime economy to a minimum. And a really good example I wanted to highlight was a night of action on the 7th of August, when combined police and licensing teams visited a number of premises and really ensured that premises were adhering to the rules. Thank you, Jan. If we can go on to the next one, please. The key for me is increasing confidence in people reporting hidden harm for us to be able to identify it. And that's where it's really key. We work really closely with our community. We have an independent advisory group that just goes from strength to strength. And we've moved to more regular monthly meetings through COVID to ensure that we're staying in touch virtually with our wider communities. And we've used some opportunities. Black Lives Matter was a great opportunity to welcome new members into our IAG, to give us a lasting voice so we can listen to the community's concerns and respond to it. And we've even got now our youngest member at 14 years old, who provides a valuable voice from the Youth Council. It's a great forum as well to open us up to scrutiny and ensure transparency, where we regularly discuss our stop search strategies, our hate crime, and how we can ensure we're reaching all of our communities and listening to their voices. And it's about that wider One Colchester partnership. Recently with Pam Green, who you heard introduce herself earlier, we've opened up the IAG to health so that we can start that preparation around winter flu vaccines, around providing updates to communities and potentially providing those updates in their primary language, not only English. We've expanded our teams, bringing 2 further experienced officers into the role of children's and young persons officers, meaning we've now got 4 dedicated officers in Colchester. And we've done a lot of work with schools through the North East Association of Head Teachers and one-to-one with safeguarding officers. Through the opening week, we ring-fenced a number of officers from training days and from our response teams. And parents would have seen a big police presence at a lot of the schools as they did their drop-offs and openings. That was just to provide reassurance, because we knew a lot of young people were worried about returning to school. And my children's and young persons officers work closely with the schools and partners, and our role is to identify the risks to young people through both sexual, criminal, and those who are exposed to domestic violence at a really early age, and put in place support and interventions to mitigate risk. And again, we're working really closely with our NGOs through Community 360 to provide that support to young people. We're also looking to roll out a national operation called Operation Encompass, across this quarter, directly connecting police with schools. And this ensures better outcomes for children who are subject to witness police-attended incidents of domestic abuse in the home. Up Encompass allows rapid provision of support with the school environment, meaning children are better safeguarded against the effects of short, medium and long term of domestic abuse. We've also put in place our first community safety engagement officer, working across the partnership and taking a longer term problem solving approach to issues. Also tasked with widening our engagement and ensuring that we're able to provide that reassurance to all our communities on a regular basis. Our second CSEO starts on the 1st of October and looking forward to getting them both together, providing long-term resolutions, working with other agencies. And for that, that's about building confidence and building trust with our communities. Jan, thank you. If you can move to the last one, that's the end of my presentation, and happy to take any questions.
Chief Inspector, can I thank you very much indeed for an excellent presentation, lots of information there. Can I just check whether any other guest wishes to say anything at this stage? No, that's fine then. In which case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the panel members, as I see them on my screen, to ask if they have any questions. And then we'll take whatever questions they have and go through them. And I'll save myself for the end. And then at the end of that, there may be some further questions as a result. So just the order you know that I can see you. So I'm going to go to Councillor Dave Harris first, followed by Councillor Sam McCarthy. So Dave, can I go to you first, please, to ask any questions you have?
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much. Excellent presentation. I would ask about recovery plans, because a lot of what we're talking about there is reaction to what's happened and reaction to the needs of the town. But I wonder whether, you know, we can expand a bit more of the thought processes that are going on now for recovery in 2021 and beyond, to make sure that we come out of this sustainable as a town, please.
That may be more of a question for Pam, who chairs our One Colchester, than me, I think.
Thank you. Now, come in, Councillor Bentley.
Yes, by all means, yes, carry on.
So I'm just finding the right part of the report. So, Councillor Harris, at the beginning of the presentation, I mentioned to you that at the very end of the partnership report, I'm trying to find the page number now, we've actually put together a summary of the work we're doing right across One Colchester. And just to remind everyone, that of course includes the Community Safety Partnership. Here we are. So if I could refer you to page 42 and 43, you'll see there that we set up a One Colchester Recovery Board. And we haven't just done that, we've done that really halfway through the worst of the pandemic, because once the initial response had been choreographed and organised, and we were confident as a single partnership our most vulnerable residents' needs were being met, we then turned our minds to the area that you've just identified, the recovery of the town, the residents and the communities within them. So what you'll see on page 43 is the beginning of a series of objectives which we've set ourselves. I won't go into a lot of detail other than to refer you to the importance of working together. That was objective 1, to make sure, and I know it's a bit of a buzz phrase, inter-organisational collaboration. Can I just put that a lot more simply for all of us really, and describe how it really worked, which was working together and being able to pick the phone up to any single one of our statutory, non-statutory and voluntary sector partners and know they would play their part. That's how we achieved objective 1 of recovery. Also, and this was, I know from previous conversations we've had, is very close to your heart and no doubt all members on the call, the importance of trying to strengthen the communities that had been so badly affected by focusing on economic disruption. And that can be something as straightforward as food, straightforward for most of us, but not for everyone. Making sure that through our food banks and other distribution networks, those in most need have the right level of food and medicines. But it's beyond that, strengthening those communities so that the assets that we have within those communities, community centres, places where people meet and find strength from each other, are really strengthened by us. And we've done that in a variety of different ways. One example would be the work of the local delivery pilot, which, as you know, is about making sure that people stay fit and healthy and active. And we've issued a whole range of micro grants to small groups to make sure that economically, physically, emotionally, mentally, communities stay as strong as they can. I could go on, but I think others might want to come in, but I would refer you to the detail of the recovery plan, which we've all signed up to and agreed to deliver. Thank you.
Just before we come back to you, Councillor Harris, are there any other partners who wish to make a comment on what you've heard from Pam? You don't have to, but just give me an opportunity. No? Okay. Councillor Harris, is there anything else you'd like to pick up from that or ask?
Yes, one is for Rob himself, and that is about the sustainability of the police force. We have to be mindful of the fact that, of course, our police force serve us very well and have served us in trying times, lots of times in our history, but none more so, I believe, in the last few months. And I want to salute the work that's been done. I just want to ask about sustainability, whether you're keeping up with the recruitment drives and the numbers of staff that you've got. You did mention that a lot of guys and girls had cancelled their holidays, so your guys and girls on the front line numbers were up. But going forward, are you able to match the losses that you may have in guys and girls leaving the service with new ones coming in with recruitment drives and training, etc.? Because I'm guessing training is a very different thing these days, I guess, for the police force.
Thank you. Inspector.
Cool, thank you. First of all, thank you for the thanks. We have a really sustainable model. We have adapted our recruitment processes so that we've taken out all the face-to-face interactions with new recruits, and they now do an online set of aptitude tests, and they get interviewed over Microsoft Teams. Of course, there are other video conferencing facilities out there, not to endorse a particular company. We are seeing our initial training's been adapted. We now spread that 10 weeks across shifts rather than having everyone in the classroom at one time. So in short, the answer is yes, we're maintaining momentum of the recruitment drive. In Colchester in particular, I see regular new officers arriving. One particular shift of mine at the moment is currently tutoring 6 brand new officers. I've never seen that before. I can give reassurance to colleagues across Colchester that my uniform operational staffing is better than it's ever been. And that's accounting for the way we are now backfilling into our detective roles as well to ensure resilience there. In Colchester, we don't see much movement. In the last 4 months, only 2 officers have left, and both of those have retired after doing their full 30 years. So I'm really, really comfortable that where we are is a sustainable position to be in.
Lovely, thank you. Right, we'll go next to Councillor McCarthy, followed by Councillor Dundas. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you very much, Chair. Hi, Rob. Thanks very much for being here this evening and for your presentation. It's really important and interesting to hear from you. Whilst it's always encouraging to hear that less crimes are being committed, and 521, I believe you said, is a big number, is it fair to say that those 521 less crimes committed are greatly helped, for want of a better word, or a sole factor of the COVID-19 pandemic? Are you seeing a decline in crimes committed in the months where we weren't in lockdown compared to that same 12-month time period the year before as well? And I think it'd be really cool for the panel to be able to see a monthly comparison chart of the last 12 months and those 12 months prior, so we can see the differences and potentially share that news with our residents in our respective wards. Is that something that can be circulated at all?
So the PFCC regularly produces kind of a rolling set of figures. So I will talk to my CSEOs about how we build that into, we produce a regular monthly bulletin that goes out, and we're trying to get that as wide as we can. So if we can build that into our regular bulletin, that would be really good to share, to provide that reassurance, not only around crime, but also the ASB. So to kind of hopefully cover all your questions, we initially saw a big drop-off in crime due to the COVID lockdown, but we rapidly saw an adaptation of methodology. So we saw a big drop in dwelling burglary, for example, because everyone was at home. But equally, we put in place patrols to make sure we didn't see that increase in commercial burglary. So we haven't seen the corresponding. What we have seen is a move to online crime and fraud, and especially with the opportunities that COVID presented. So those people being phoned up and offered a COVID testing kit for X amount of pounds if they just disclose their PIN number and bank account number. So we've done a lot of work around reassuring people for that. Personally, having done a little bit of analysis, the only one area I think that's dropped as a direct result of COVID was shoplifting, because the shops were shut. Hopefully I've covered all the bits of your question there, Councillor.
Well, thank you, Chief Inspector. Just on the bulletin, which sounds a great idea, I would suggest that if you sent out wider and for all members to see, if you sent it to our democratic services, they would distribute to all members. And indeed, they could put it on to the ELC, or certainly in our case, Colchester Association of Local Councils, and all town and parish councils will receive it as well. And that would be a lot.
Thank you.
So if you have a conversation with Mr. Powell, or your officers can afterwards, and he'll make sure that that's done.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much indeed. Right, any more, Councillor McCarthy? Was that it for the moment?
No, that was a bit of a bombardment there. So no, thank you very much, Rob, and thank you, Chair. That's great.
No problem. Thank you. I'll go to Councillor Dundas next. Then after that, Councillor Hogg. Councillor Dundas.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of comments and a couple of questions. Firstly, yeah, I'd like to add my compliments. I said it before, and I'll say it again, certainly to Pam and her team and Community 360, and indeed to the police for their performance during the COVID, or initial COVID crisis. I think we can all be very impressed and proud of what they've done. Just to pick up also, I think Inspector Huddleston mentioned the CBT teams and the email address we have as councillors. I found that very useful and very effective. I've been impressed by the responses I've usually got. Obviously, as councillors, we keep that private, or at least I hope we do. But I would encourage the police to continue putting resources into that where you can. I think it's an excellent initiative. That's one of my questions, is that there's quite a lot of talk, rightly, about antisocial behaviour in the town, and we refer a lot to the town centre, and it's talked about in the presentation quite a lot. And I recognise the vast majority of the problems are there in Colchester town centre, but we do always have to remember that we are a borough, and we have more than one town in the borough. So we do have to remember places like Wivenhoe, which is a town, Tiptree, Stanway, Mersey, and also in the next few years you're going to see places like the Northern Gateway and Stanway develop probably their own nighttime economy, because you're going to having cinemas and things hopefully going into those areas. So we do have to make sure we don't take our eye off the ball and forget that they are urban or increasingly urban areas with increasingly urban problems, which I think as councillors for those areas, we've seen more of the kind of issues which used to just be in the town centre. We're now seeing them in other areas. So I hope that's not forgotten about. My other question was really about county lines. I've got really no idea in my mind how much of a factor that is, particularly in terms of drug dealing in the town. I don't know whether it accounts for sort of 10% or 90%. So in other words, I realise it's a slightly subjective question, but how much of our sort of drug dealing problems and that are homegrown, if you like, and how much are imported from elsewhere? I just wonder if we've got any idea, just to give an idea in our own minds, sort of what sort of figure that is.
Absolutely, I can give you a little update around that. So county lines, by their very definition, aren't homegrown. They are metropolitan gangs who move out and bring misery and exploitation. If I was to talk about intelligence picture around drug dealing, I would say I had 18 separate, what we would call named lines. However, Of those, 11 have been disrupted and are not active in the across Colchester. We find drug dealing in pockets. Unfortunately, Greenstead appears to be an attractive place around the Hythe, out towards the university. But more recently, we are seeing some of our more rural areas starting to be looked at by some of these gangs. And I think what we need to remember when we're talking about gangs is it's not just drug dealing. So as you rightly say, it's the antisocial behaviour that goes with it. But more worryingly, it's the exploitation of vulnerable people. It's picking on those vulnerable users or those minors and exploiting them in an attempt to evade detection. I think the bulk of our ASB, it's really weird. ASB covers such a wide plethora of stuff, as does violent crime. You know, violent crime includes harassment. And to give you an example, we had to record a report of somebody whose dinghy had been released from its mooring for the 3rd time, and the person was feeling harassed. So that went down as harassment and became recorded as a violent crime. And antisocial behaviour is very much the same. You know, one of the examples we've got are some people in a park on a Sunday morning and neighbours calling up to say, we're really disgusted by this behaviour. And it was a number of 11 and 12-year-olds playing football. So it's a broad brushstroke. What I will say is our OPSEPTA deployments to detect knife crime have had a significant impact on drug dealing in Colchester. The disruption of our organised crime group took out large quantities of Class A drugs and prevented that coming in. We do know that a number of county lines who were established in Colchester due to the attention we've paid to them are now no longer in Colchester. And we have a dedicated team. We have something called a Raptor team that works across the north of Essex, who work very closely with the Metropolitan Police. And when we look to execute drug warrants, not only do we do it within Colchester and take out the end game, but we follow that all the way back and we take out the line holder and the people at the top of the line as well, and look to seize their money. And we've been really successful at that. Compared to where we were 12 months ago, when we had around 18 or 19 active operational drug gangs, as I say, we're now down to around 7 that are really active, 2 or 3 of which are homegrown people trying to establish themselves. And we're very targeted and focused on making their lives as hard as we can in order that they can't establish. I hope that answered your question, Councillor.
Lovely, thank you very much indeed. I'm getting nods there, so thank you, Chief Inspector. We're going to Councillor Mike Hogg next, followed by Councillor Whitehead. Councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, Rob.
Hi, Mike, how are you?
I'm good, I'm good. Along with everybody else, thank you for the work that you're doing, you and your team, which I've witnessed at first hand in St Anne's and St John's recently. On occasion, on that one particular occasion, advice was greeted as harassment by the police. And I have to say that the officers who attended this particular evening were put under considerable pressure, and they acted in absolutely the right way. There's no doubt in my mind that COVID-19 has brought about an increase in drug and alcohol use. And in specific areas, I'd be very interested in, well, I wouldn't say I'm lucky in so much as that I have contacts with the police by email and dedicated phone lines that I can take information to and discuss things with, for which I'm very grateful. What I don't have is contacts with probation services with regard to halfway homes, halfway houses that cause grief and aggravation in my ward. So I'd be interested in the relationship between the police and probation services and how you see that in particular with halfway homes and halfway houses that are causing an ongoing problem. And I've tried to establish relations with probation services in NACRA in particular and failed. So I'd be interested in how you see that, your working relationship with them, and hopefully it's a better one than mine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Chief Inspector, we'll come to you first, and perhaps we can hear from Mr. Messam as well, since the service was mentioned, and what assistance you can offer Councillor Hogg. Chief Inspector first.
So first of all, Councillor, please continue to report any concerns you have through the community policing team email or call into our community policing team. We're happy to take reports from you. Our relationship with probation, NACRO, is excellent. Only last week we were discussing with them a planned warrant at premises to disrupt some drug supply. We have regular meetings. They're part of our multi-agency coordination panel that meets on a regular basis. And we're just looking now at a pilot project to potentially broaden the number of people we discuss at a regular meeting with the entire partnership to ensure we have that joined up approach. So yeah, from my point of view, we have a really good working relationship.
Thank you. Can I go to Mr. Messam and just ask for a comment from what you've heard from Councillor Hogg, please?
Yeah, just following on from what a police colleague has said, probation also have a good relationship with the police. In terms of the issue raised, I think it's important to make a distinction between the probation service, which is National Probation Service, and NACRO, and my colleague from the CRC will be able to provide information in terms of that commissioning arrangement. But if we've got individuals who are identified as causing, as being involved in antisocial behaviour, that information will be passed to us. And if they're on licence, we've got the option, or we have available the option to look at enforcing that, whether that's through a warning because they're in breach of, they could potentially be in breach of their licence, or in some cases, if it's serious enough, we can look at recall. And similarly, if they're on a community order, we can take similar action. So, like I said, I don't know if Councillor Hogg has had any contact with anyone in my service, but I'm quite happy to have a conversation with him if he feels that would be useful.
Yes, Mr. Messam, thank you. I think that's exactly what Councillor Hogg was saying, if I don't want to speak for him, but it was about the not being able to speak to someone and build a relationship from that point of view. So,
yeah,
right, I will come back in. Can I just go to Jenny Gibson, because that was referenced to CRC, and just if Jenny's got anything to add, then we'll come back to you if you don't mind. So, Jenny Gibson, you've heard what colleagues have said. Have you any comment on that and help Councillor Hogg?
Hello, good evening. Good evening, Councillor Hogg. Yes, so I mean, following on from what Rob has said, we have a really good relationship with the police. As mentioned, we are part of the multi-agency coordination panel and the priority offender team, and with our local integrated offender management team as well. We have a local lead who is our resettlement manager, Simon Ablett, so I'm happy to pass you on his details at the end of this meeting. He is our lead for resettlement services and our link with NACRO and our Through the Gate services and our accommodation projects that you may be referring to. And as my colleague David Messam has highlighted, we also, any information from the police is shared to us and those individuals who may be subject to licence or any other community sentence, we can take enforcement action on those individuals where there are concerns and issues raised. So again, I can pass you on my details as I'm the Colchester manager, but also my colleague Simon Ablett, who is the lead for our resettlement services, would be a great person to speak to.
Thank you. So Councillor Hogg, I think I've heard two offers there from David Messam and Jenny Gibson to have contact with you.
I'd be very grateful, Chairman, if they could get through to Mark Hogg at colchester.gov.uk and with their email addresses and phone numbers. That would be very useful. Yes. Thank you. Thank you for the offers.
Yeah, sorry, can you repeat that? Councillor, my apologies. Can you repeat that again? The email address?
mike.hogg@colchester.gov.uk.
I think just as well for ease as well, I think Howell can supply all the details for council.
Yeah. Thank you.
Rather than trying to scribble it, because it's, if you don't know, it's quite a complicated set of emails. So, right, okay, thank you for that. We'll go to Councillor Whitehead next, followed by Councillor Hayter. Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Rob and Mike and Pam and everyone else attending tonight. It was heartening, Rob, to hear what you said about the stop and search levels with the rate with the BAME community. I had a little look up on the while you were speaking. I think you said it was 12.9% of people stopped with BAME. Right. I had a quick look up, and the 2011 census has us at 12.49% of the Colchester population. So that looks very good. So one thing I'm wondering is, I mean, that's a very big difference to the national average, which I think BAME people have stopped something like 9.6 times more. So I'm wondering if we have a sense of what we're doing much better or getting so right compared to elsewhere. And the other side of it is there's a big disproportionate disproportion between BAME and white populations in terms of the fixed penalty notices that have been given out in the national figures as well. And I think in Essex, BAME people 1.6 times more likely to receive one of those than their white counterparts. So I'm wondering, do we know the stats for that side of things for Colchester as well? And are we doing as well on that side of things as we are on the stop and search figures?
Thank you.
No problem. So to address the stop search first, if you'll excuse me, I've been involved in various stop search kind of projects and research for a number of years. I'm passionate about it as a really good disruption tool and a deterrent, and I firmly believe it saves lives. But equally, I am very conscious of the community impact of it. I have an ethos that I stole from Dr. Locard, whose principles underpin forensic science, which is every contact leaves a trace. And I believe that applies to stop search as well as forensics. And if stop search is done well, it should be a really positive experience for somebody. It should be done with dignity, it should be done with respect, and it should be done with appropriate consideration to surroundings and that person's human rights. So I am passionate about enforcing that our stops will be ethical, they'll be intelligence-led, and because we work so closely with their intelligence department and our analysts, we don't go out and blanket stop search. You don't get stop searched in Colchester because of the colour of your skin. You get stop searched because of a number of factors. And I'm really hot on that scrutiny. I share those and have done since we commenced the IAG. I'm part of a group looking at, with ACC Profit, looking to get a referencing panel up and running where what my aim is to be able to show the body-worn video interactions of stop search to members of our community and receive feedback on that, so we can continue to improve. So I think that's why we're better in Colchester. I've driven that from the time I've landed down through my inspectors, my sergeants to my teams. In terms of FPN, fixed penalty notices cover such a broad spectrum from road traffic matters through to smaller offending matters. So no, I don't have statistics about that for Colchester. I'd need to understand what that FPN figure related to. I have been personally accused of stopping a car which had a number of blacked out windows and an illegal registration. Was told by the occupant, you only stopped me for the colour of my skin, and had to have the conversation, which was, I can't see through your windows, so how did I know who was driving? Officers will use the 4 E's, the engage, explaining, encourage, and enforcement is always our last resort. But yeah, I apologise. I don't have any figures for Colchester.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Councillor Whitehead. Let's move on to Councillor Hayter. We've got a councillor. Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon, Councillor Whitehead.
I do. If I could, I've got a couple more.
No, carry on.
Yeah, thank you very much. Sorry, I don't know if I did say that the FPM figure was for the COVID fines in particular. But yeah, no, that sounds very good, and I hope that's being shared beyond Colchester. The approach that you're doing, because it sounds fantastic, and it's obviously working given the figures. Another couple of things I wanted to ask about was one was around. I noticed from the report there's been an increase in hate crime reporting. So I was just wondering if you could say a bit more about that. What kind of crime is that, and do we have a sense of why those figures are going up, and what action's been taken? And then the other thing was about another specific type of crime, which is domestic violence, which I assume has been a big issue during this period with lockdown and everything. And so I'm wondering, do we know what the impact of that has been on domestic violence rates, what the challenges have been, and have there been things that we've worked into the response to try to deal with the particular issues thrown up by the recent months in that area?
Yeah, very good question, that last one, yes. Chief Inspector.
Oh, okay. So to address the hate crime question first, we have over the last 12 months put an all-out effort into opening more ways for people to report hate crime. And what I want to make clear is the definition of hate crime, which is any incident, whether a crime or not, which is perceived by the victim or any other person to be motivated by hostility or prejudice based on a personal characteristic. And it's that perceived bit. So we can have crimes where on the surface you don't think there's a hate element, but somebody perceives there is. And those can cover race, religion, disability, sexual orientation, or transgender. Again, we've put a lot of work with our communities into this around giving people the confidence to come forward and report. And what's really reassuring, in the 12 months to August 2020, which is our latest set of statistics, the hate crime characteristic reporting is very much the same as it was up to March 2020 pre-lockdown. So we haven't seen a significant change. On the whole, it appears to be in Colchester racial hatred. So a lot of work's going into how we understand that, how we bridge that, and how we... Colchester's a really diverse town, and I'm really proud of that. And I really want everyone else to be too. So we should be a tolerant society, and we should be able to work together. So we've put a lot of, as I say, we've put a lot of effort into it. What's really reassuring for racial crimes to the end of August 2020, we've got over a 20% solved rate. So, sorry, 20% solved rate off the top of my head, which is a big jump from where we were approximately a year ago at only 13%. So yeah, it's a combination of encouraging people to come forward and report, working with our communities through such things as only a couple of weeks ago. We did our first virtual Black, Asian, Minority Ethnic conference organised by Community 360 to really understand the needs of people. But I would say here as well that in terms of victims, when I break down our victims by ethnicity, 173 victims were white North European and perceived they'd been victims of hate crime. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, I was going to say just the issue. Thank you for that excellent answer. There's the issue of domestic violence as well.
So to talk through domestic abuse. So initially during lockdown, we saw a big drop off in the reporting of domestic abuse, and we've worked with partners such as our independent domestic violence advisors and some of the charities involved in support work. We know that during school holidays, reporting of domestic abuse drops as victims don't want to create a scene in front of the children, and we know that traditionally when children go back to school, it ramps up again. So we put in place a number of plans to ensure that our relevant support services could cope with an increase in referrals as we came out of lockdown. What we did see as lockdown went on, whilst the reporting rate stayed fairly low, the level of violence increased, which was really concerning. But again, we dealt with that robustly. We've seen an increase in the use of domestic violence protection orders and protection notices across Essex, to the extent we were mentioned in Parliament, where an MP said if I was to be a victim of domestic abuse, I'd want to do it in Essex because their policing response is so good. We currently issue something like 13 more domestic violence protection orders than our nearest equivalent force in the region. So we're really geared up for that. We're also, the domestic abuse response is run by an overarching partnership called the Southend, Essex and Thurrock Domestic Abuse Board. And we have a force lead in Chief Superintendent Andy Mariner. And we're consistently looking for that best practice to bring that in and implement it to force. I'm personally running a project currently that will be force-wide to ensure that where a victim is related to a police officer or a member of police staff, they've got the confidence to come forward and report and know that they'll have an independent investigation and the right support around them. So it's all about encouraging that transparency. As lockdowns lifted further, we've gone back to our pre-COVID levels of reporting. We haven't seen that huge spike. But what we have seen, generally speaking, across all the crime types, is an increase in 999 calls to Essex Police. And if I give you an example, across this weekend, we saw 1,065 999 priority 1 calls come into our control room across 48 hours.
Inspector, thank you. Curtis Whitehead, is that it now? Any more? Let's move then on.
I do have others, but I will hold off and maybe if we can come back once everyone else.
Okay, by all means, of course, yes. Councillor Heater, and then I'll go to Councillor Barber.
Thank you, Chair. No, very good report and update. Very interested in that. I just want to touch on something that I think it was Councillor McCarthy mentioned about the trends with crime reported and crimes committed during lockdown and how that changed. Are you expecting much of a difference now we're coming back out of it? Do you think it will go back to previous levels as a percentage of where the crimes happen? Or do you think where, for example, domestic burglaries have dropped, but there's been more online crime, do you think that will stay because there's now a different outlet for opportunity out there?
Well, thank you. So we're seeing nationally a general decline in dwelling burglary anyway, through improved security around front doors, the use of video doorbells, people's Wi-Fi having internal cameras, that kind of thing. So it's made it slightly more difficult for your traditional dwelling burglar anyway. No, I think what we've seen is organised crime groups diversifying. We'd seen that anyway. We know that across the preceding 12 months, I'm kind of talking generally now across Essex as opposed to just Colchester, we've seen organised crime groups diversify, from just the supply of Class A drugs into organised immigration crime, human trafficking, modern slavery, those crimes where there are lower risk to them than the movement of out and out illegal objects. So we're seeing criminals develop all the time and identify new areas for exploitation. The internet just gives them a really big marketplace and access to a much bigger audience to do that. What I want to encourage through our partnerships is that consistent crime prevention messaging to our local community. The last few dwelling burglaries I've seen are the same MO. Somebody's walked up to a plastic front door, stuck a screwdriver in it and popped it because the person, when they went to bed, hasn't actually turned the key in the front door and engaged all the locks. So it's about getting that consistent messaging out to people around. The police will never ask you for your PIN number if they call you. The NHS are not going to want you to pay for an appointment for a COVID test. When you go to bed, double lock your front door. And if you've got a car that starts without putting a key in it, one of these signal things, put the key into a bag that blocks the transmission of those signals. So it's really key we keep driving home those messages to protect our community.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Hayes, anything else?
No, that's everything. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barber, then it'll be to me. So, Councillor Barber.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chief Inspector, for coming this evening, as well as other partners. I really value, by the way, the email addresses Councillor Dundas mentioned earlier, and you said beforehand you wouldn't always reply to every message, but you certainly take them on board. And I've seen updates in those. I thought we did get updates, actually. They've sent round to Councillor Lilly and then they were circulated, which are really good and say what you've been doing. And I've seen stuff that I've reported through the email address that you've taken action, particularly during the height of lockdown where you were responding to potential breaches. So that was really good. So I want to thank you for that. I don't know how many of you guys have Instagram, but I've just turned 26 recently. And my generation, I have to say, have been pretty flippant lately over the rules on COVID regulations. People who don't have Instagram will not see it to the same extent as someone who does. I reckon I could put 100 people and 99 of them were breaking in some way the guidance. And the change in the rules, my understanding was in part because the police force were nationally were encouraging the government to put them on a footing in law because they were just guidance. There was nothing really a lot of enforcing authorities could do. So going forward, I guess we haven't really touched on COVID regulations, I don't think, this evening. And I appreciate what you said at the start about understanding going forward what's happening. But I'd be interested in understanding the relationship between licensing authorities and the police force for licensed venues and where people go to, where best to report concerns. Because I think now there is definitely going to be a toughening. I've already seen actually in businesses already where I thought were a bit on the line of what was COVID secure have already tightened up, even just their social distancing measures. So I'd be interested to understand, and it's not just pubs and bars. I think many of them have been really good, and it's definitely on the individual a lot of the time going in private housing stuff. But I would be interested in understanding the relationship between the council basically and the police for licensed activities, and also COVID marshals. I don't know what they are, but I would be interested in understanding if you know what they are and where they may fit into your operational decisions going forward. I think that would be welcome. And also just if you were able to, if the rural crime strategy, as I represent a 50% rural ward, if that's has to be changed in any way as a result of COVID, because I think that starts in 2017. I don't know if there was a new one anyway coming out. But sorry, that's quite a big topic. So I've
yes, that's a lot of questions
as always.
Long peroration to get there. So, Chief Inspector, could I ask you please to unpick that?
Absolutely. So I'll talk about the licensing first, and I think Mel Rundle's on the line anyway. Mel and I work really closely together through the partnership. And we organise on a regular basis joint licensing visits where my licensing teams, I say mine, they're centrally managed, but the licensing teams of Essex Police go out with the licensing teams from Colchester Borough Council, and we look at premises. And sometimes they're big nights of action where we bring a number of us out. Other times they're slightly lower key. As part of my COVID patrol plan, my teams are built into a visit to a minimum of 3 licensed premises a night to ensure compliance with COVID regulations. But as I say, the partnership's really strong now, and we try and support each other as best we can. COVID marshals is brand new. So far, we have had no guidance as to what they are, who they are, or how they will fit in. That will filter down via the National Police Chiefs Council and through our own gold COVID command structure. And at some point we'll get some guidance. So I really can't give you any more of a steer or make it any clearer than that at the moment. In terms of the rural crime strategy, again, I have no ownership over that. But in terms of what we do around our rural areas in Colchester, our rural areas are built into our COVID patrol plans. We have our dedicated officers from the community policing team assigned to each of our rural areas in order that we build up that familiar face with the community. And whilst we can't quite get back to the Bobby on the beat for every village, we hope that we should put the same faces in the same places on a regular basis and build that relationship through our engagements. But we're still seeing, in terms of rural crime, those traditional crimes of hair coursing, the badger baiting, and the destruction of farm crops. Our rural engagement team are really hot on that, and they work really closely with our local intelligence team and through kind of our ANPR networks and bits and pieces to ensure we can identify vehicles and people really early to disrupt that. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you, Chief Inspector. Councillor Barber, any more?
No, that was a very concise way to, very impressive, I have to say. I watched that as a tutorial, I think. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good. Yes, Pam.
I was trying to raise my hand electronically, but I don't think I succeeded. I wonder whether you would be willing to allow, I was going to say maybe Councillor Lilly is the Cabinet member for licensing, and also Mel Rundle, because she has been at the heart of the leadership of our own licensing enforcement activity. And I think Councillor Barber might find it helpful to listen to their perspective, if you would agree.
Thank you. So let's go to Mel Rundle first, then Councillor Lilly afterwards. So Mel Rundle, please.
Hello everyone, apologies, I still can't get my video to work, so my sincere apologies for that. So in terms of the licensing question, absolutely reflect what Rob says. We have a really good partnership locally and a very direct approach. If we receive any complaints in relation to breaches, my officers visit the premises, and if we feel it's necessary, we issue a community protection warning, and we work very closely with the Director of Public Health for Essex, who is very supportive of any action that we wish to take, and will issue a direction to the premises if required, which could either be to reduce the number of customers that they can have, or it might be to close at certain times, or reduce the queues, or whatever we might ask them to do. In terms of the marshals, the guidance is kind of coming through thick and fast. My understanding from the Director of Public Health today is that funding from government will be available for any local authorities that are on the watch list. There is quite strict criteria which places you on the watch list. I think if your COVID infection rates reach certain levels, then you are on the watch list and you could potentially apply for funding for the marshals. Locally, to be honest, I would suggest that we already have a version of COVID marshals in the form of our bid ambassadors that conduct regular patrols throughout the town centre, encouraging and reminding residents in terms of social distancing and wearing face masks, etc. Obviously, we have our own neighbourhood wardens who will also engage with members of the public and remind them of their responsibilities. So for Colchester, I don't think at this stage we will get any additional resource in the form of COVID marshals, but from a positive perspective, that's because we're not on the government's watch list. So potentially we already have quite adequate measures in place with our own officers. So I think that's all from me. Thank you, Chair.
Mel Rundle, thank you very much indeed. Let's go to Councillor Lilly.
Thank you, Chair. I have had my hand up quite a long time, ever since Councillor Dundas was talking, but I won't take it personally against you, Kevin.
Okay.
Yeah, there's quite a few. Councillor Barber, yes, people think that when they post all these pictures inside pubs, of packed pubs on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, you name it, that they're only seen by their friends, but they are shared all the way across the spectrum, and when they're sent to me, they're they go straight on to the licensing team and visits are made. So, and we use it as evidence as well against that, which is quite good. So, and people don't realise, oh, how did you find that out? But obviously they're in there. So getting back to a couple of other issues with what Councillor Dundas was saying about the police and email address, which has worked really well. And Rob has appointed a community policing officer now with PC Brian Spears, who's quite good. But the other thing that, the one thing that we are now looking at through working with our antisocial behaviour officer, Nathan Sooley at Colchester Homes, is that we will be asking councillors to make a community impact statement when they've got concerns about houses that are either dealing drugs or their antisocial behaviour, and they make a complaint to the council. We'll be asking councillors to make a statement to back that up, so that we could, when we go to court for take action, we've got something that shows these people are a nuisance to the community, and councillors can now be a real big part of that. So I think there's a form coming round soon by Nathan in CBH, and I'll pass that around to everybody that you need to fill in. That'll be a great help to everybody that we can help deal with that. I've made a few myself to the police, but in the past about the town centre and the effect of the drug deal and such in there. I think that getting back to the BAME situation, I think Rob's been a bit he's been a bit low key on this. He started up this this community forum with all BAME communities, and I believe when first started there was about 10 or 12 people attended. Now I think it's over 50 people from a lot of ethnic communities all around Colchester, and they all come along and they communicate with the police, and that's working really well. So I think that Rob should take great credit in doing that, and that's a real big effort for us in dealing with that. So I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chair.
No, Councillor Lilly, thank you. And I'm sorry we missed you. We don't have the chat or hand raising facilities, so please make it very obvious. And if we don't,
okay, sorry.
Then just interject, and that's fine. Councillor Barber, I'll come to you, but it's my turn now. All right, as the questions. Then I'll come back to you and Councillor Whitehead as well. So can I just also add my thanks to the police and all the partners in all of this. There was no COVID-19 handbook of what to do when this started. I think the way that our council, I think the services, police, all the emergency services has been outstanding. I think also the public have, on the whole, been absolutely brilliant in the way they have responded to this, which is a pandemic of very serious proportions. And so I think none of us should underestimate just the sheer amount of work and learning on the job as this went. And I think we've been exemplary in Colchester, which is why I think, unless someone corrects me, we have one of the lowest COVID infection rates in the county, and indeed I think in the region as well. Now, I also want to add thanks on a divisional and local matter. You mentioned at the beginning, Chief Inspector, Abington Reservoir and speeding. Speeding has been a byproduct of having empty roads, as you mentioned. Abington Reservoir was a particularly bad place, and we understand, I think that was almost an organised event there. Your officers have been exemplary, keeping myself and also the parish council involved with the operation there. And also last night I was at the parish council meeting in Laird de la Haye, and they wanted that to be expressed as well. So thank you, and please pass that thanks on. I would, thank you. But it certainly has greatly reduced that. And I know through personal contact we've had, anytime I contact you at this matter, you're very quick to respond, you and your officers, and also actually turn up at public meetings. So thank you for that. Two questions in two parts on two very different issues. One's on county lines, which I'll direct to you, Chief Inspector. The second one is on these marshals, because I think we just have to unpack as part of public information what we know and what we don't know. I'm going to direct the question on marshals to Councillor Lilly and possibly Mel Rundle. We've had some information because that's a local government issue. But actually around the law is something that's a police issue, and I just need to unpack for, I think, residents' information as to what the law says and what people can and can't do. So we just deal with county lines first. When this was first being discussed, one of the big issues was around cuckooing, as it was explained to me, and that is where gangs will come out of metropolitan areas, find a vulnerable person. If I get this wrong, please correct me, that's my understanding. Find a vulnerable person and literally take over their home, which then becomes the base for illegal activity. If I got that correct, Chief Inspector, I just wondered what level of cuckooing had taken place in Colchester, if at all, and what we've done to reduce it, please. My first question to you.
Okay, so yes, we have seen cuckooing take place. And in some cases, it's really difficult to identify because in some cases, the person cuckooed started off as a willing participant and things got out of hand. In other cases, they've been out and out groomed. We haven't seen significant numbers. Where we have, we've seen an exceptionally good partnership response to concerns in terms of providing adult safeguarding to the vulnerable adults through social care partners and alternative accommodation where necessary. Close work with Colchester Borough Homes around closure orders on premises and partial closure orders to allow that person to stay in their own property. Because a lot of cuckooing is the person doesn't have the power to say no. So if we put in place a partial closure order that says you can live here, but you can't have any person in your address other than you, it gives them that piece of paper to hold up to the gang and go, look, if you come in here, you're going to get found out, you're going to go to prison and so am I. And gangs don't want to be anywhere near an address that might get a visit from any of the agencies because that's going to lose A, their product, and B, the money they've made. And I think it's testament to what Pam Donnelly was saying earlier. One of the things we really enjoy in Colchester is that really close partnership working and the ability, not only at our level, but all the way down, for one of my officers to pick up the phone to somebody at Colchester Borough Homes and say, we've got this, we want to do a warrant tomorrow, and to speak to adult social care. And suddenly tomorrow there is reps from all of those agencies lined up to go in. And that makes a huge difference to the wider community as well, because it's not just about protecting that vulnerable person. We know where a premises is used, it causes massive misery for that surrounding community. It puts people in fear. So a key part is the engagement with that wider community, the publicity around putting those closure orders in, the support we give to that vulnerable person, but equally that one-to-one that we give to people when we go and knock on their door and say, we've done a warrant down the road. If you get any more problems, please give us a call and we'll be back. So hopefully that answers your question on the county lines piece.
Yes, thank you. And I think that's very useful information and good to know. And actually, I've learned some more from that, as we all have tonight. And the fact you're very much on top of this, working with partners at Borough Homes and others, I think is excellent news and will keep the community safe. My question now, I'll come to you first, Chief Inspector, and then I'll go to Councillor Lilly. This new concept of marshals, again, when we had lockdown, the police were handed new powers that were being written, that weren't written before. And I think the way that was dealt with nationally, but also locally by the police force was quite extraordinary. And the way the police engaged with people before they had to get serious with them, I think really helped enormously. On this situation, what I'm not clear about, and I just think probably other people aren't either, is what the law currently says. And I understand almost the ink is still drying on the law as we speak. What the law says in terms of if you are in more than groups of 6, what are the powers of the police? If you answer this, by the way, as I don't know, that's fine. But what are the powers of the police? And are you going to be using the encouragement bit first? And then if you don't do as you are told, then you are facing a stiffer penalty, perhaps. Chief Inspector.
So thank you. We're not changing our approach. And it's an approach we adopted right at the start of COVID, as I said. The 4 E's, which is to engage with people, have that conversation, explain the danger they're putting themselves into and potentially others through their actions, encourage them to adhere to the regulations, and only if all of those fail do we go to enforcement. Under the current legislation, we have the ability to issue a fixed penalty notice, which is a £100 fine. I know that during the last period, we had over 20,000 engagements logged, and we issued a very, very small minority tickets across Essex. And on the whole, my thanks to the community in Colchester. when I went out personally on patrol and spoke to members of the public who were out during lockdown, either they had a rationale for being out and it was justified, or they were very quick to say, no, we understand that, we're terribly sorry, we're going home, and on the whole complied. We're still getting our heads around the guidance, but it is in effect any gathering more than 6 people that's not the same household, what I understand to be a linked household. I'm not really sure what that is myself, but we've got some long written guidance that I'm taking home to read tonight, or a support bubble. And we do know that, you know, some people who are very isolated rely on that bunch of neighbours down the road to stay sane, and we're not going to stop them linking up. But it's very much about not having big groups coming together from a number of households, from a number of areas, which just increases that infection risk potential.
Thank you. And just in terms of officers being out on Mersey Island, certainly on the beach where we've had a lot of gathering in the early days of this, your police officers were excellent. They were here, and I saw that encouragement in practice. And well, very, very good. Just finally on that, because we've talked about licensed premises, but we're coming into a period of very warm weather. We've had one today. We're coming up to the weekend, and places like Castle Park and Beach at Mersey and others where people would gather. Are you intending to put extra patrols out into these areas during the daytime?
Yeah. So on a daily basis, we're putting dedicated patrols out. I've currently got around what we call priority locations, around 65 priority locations, which vary from parks, beaches, to alleyways we know people hang out in because they think they're not covered by CCTV, through to some licensed premises. We know we can't get around all 65 every day. But we do have a plan in place and a recording mechanism to make sure we're getting to them at random intervals across our set of patrols.
Inspector, thank you. My final question then is to Councillor Lilly about the marshals themselves, which I understand is a local government function. And I think we've heard from Mel Rundle today, actually, who's explained a bit further on that, which is useful. I've noticed in other parts of the country, around Leeds and on in Cornwall as a unitary council, but in Camborne, Newquay and other areas in Cornwall, marshals are already out. And I've heard also Mel Rundle say that we are doing a version of that. I just want to see, and of course you could easily say, well, we have funded for development, which is a perfectly legitimate thing to say. I just want to understand, though, for the public, that are we intending to use people like marshals to give this advice to people across the borough?
Well, it's a very good question, and it all depends on finance. But I would say, and I would also like to reiterate what Rob has said, we've had a strategy in Colchester which has worked really well so far, where we use our wardens, we use the police, we use the ambassadors to deal with issues. We rely on the public when they report, we investigate. So I would like us to see that continue and to issue guidance that we have. Don't forget, marshals they'll have no powers whatsoever. They can ask someone to separate, and then we're supposed to call the police and they're supposed to come out and deal with it. But we would really like to deal with it as a friendly warning first, to say that this is, you're not supposed to be doing that, and if they don't comply, then we would venture to call in the police or our zone wardens to do that. We don't really have the money to employ marshals as such. It'd be nice if the government actually give us the money for that. It was great. I've actually seen one advertised somewhere for 30k a year. That was down over in the west, so I might apply myself, actually. It'd be quite good. So at this moment in time, and Mel could probably clear it up a bit more, because the guidance, more guidance come through today, which Mel has got, which I've just learned about. So I think that once we've got it all in place, we'll sit down and we'll work out a strategy of what we intend to do and whether we can have marshals in that respect. That'll be quite good. So we're going to work something out, Kevin.
That's right. And I would, Mel, I think it's your microphone we're picking up. Could I just ask you to on to mute for the moment, please, Mel? Thank you. What I would just say is once you've done that, and clearly you have to do that piece of work, it would be useful, I think, and the reason I've asked my questions is on public information more than anything else, is that we need to get that out to the reassured. I said up to now, I think what the councils have done, what the police have done, and indeed the public have kept us very safe in Colchester. And I think from what you said, Mel, I noticed you did unmute. Did you want to come in at that point at all?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Bentley. Just to add to what Mike is saying, absolutely, that the marshals won't have any powers, but just for some reassurance, really, in terms of groups larger than 6, you know, if any of these are witnessed within any of our licensed premises, so if you witness a table of 15 people in a cafe or a pub or a restaurant, that is absolutely something that my officers would go out and investigate and take action against those premises. We have sent letters to every single licensed premises in Colchester today, reminding them of their responsibilities, reminding them that test and trace becomes the law from this Friday, and of course we will be keeping a very close eye on any events and activities that people are organising. So absolutely, we can update once we know more about the marshals, but you know, there are other avenues we can explore.
I think brilliant, Mel, thank you very much indeed. And also Councillor Lilly.
Yeah, sorry, and on the track and trace, which we find is an incredibly important thing that we need to do. The one thing that we have had is an awful lot of complaints about restaurants mostly not complying with the track and trace. I had some come in the other day in town centre, and we've had a lot of outside pubs in the rural areas as well. So Mel, we've got over 500 licensed premises. Everyone's going to get a letter. We will be checking up on that. Any information received from councillors, that you will send all the stuff through. Send it all through to the licensing team. I know they'll hate me for it, but if you have information, then they need to know, basically, and we will investigate that. The track and trace is incredibly important.
Yes.
There was an article in the Guardian, I believe, that said Colchester was one of the worst places to issue or to ask for track and trace, but we asked them for which places they visited. They couldn't give us that background information. I wouldn't suggest that they made it all up to make a news story. Of course not. But track and trace is going to be important to us in that respect.
Good. Okay. Thank you for that. I'm very grateful. I would just perhaps suggest that an update members might be very useful when we're ready to do that. And indeed, right. Okay. That's all for me. Thank you. Normally I would call for a break now, but I'm sensing we are coming towards the end of this. We've given our panelists quite a thorough grilling, but we have 2 more speakers. I'll go back to Councillor Whitehead and also Councillor Barber, and I would just encourage you to be succinct in your questioning. Thank you, Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Chair. I will do my best. I'm always very impressed, and it's always a very interesting one to sit on. And I'm always very impressed by the partnership working and the preventative side of it. And it seems to me that that side of things, the probation stuff, the youth service stuff, the community rehab, is probably the sort of stuff that's been really heavily disrupted in the recent period, with face-to-face contact being reduced. So I just wonder if some of our speakers could say a little bit about how they've dealt with those challenges. Have they found new ways of working that maybe they'll be extending into the future around those sorts of services as well?
Thank you. So is there anyone particularly you want to hear from first, Councillor Whitehead?
I'm open to all offers, Chair.
Well, look, what I'll do then, because I can't think of another way of doing it, is I'll go in the order I can see people on my screen. I'll go to David Messam first, then I'll go to Jenny Gibson. So, Mr. Messam, would you like to come on and just give a brief overview? Thank you.
Yes. Well, for the National Probation Service, because of COVID, our initial plans, we reduced the number of face-to-face contacts, as you've already highlighted, and we started to do doorstep visits as well as telephone contacts. We still had some office visits, but they were face-to-face appointments, and obviously we ensured that the office was COVID secure, but they were with high-risk offenders. As we've moved towards the recovery phase, we've increased the number of face-to-face contacts and are reducing doorstep and phone contact. I think the feedback from staff in terms of well-being, there's been improvements in well-being, and also telephone contact being effective. I think there is some sense that we will look at what worked well once we come out of COVID, but we're looking at what worked well with a view to building that in terms of going forward.
Lovely, thank you. Can I go to, because it's linked, Jenny Gibson next, please?
Hello. Yeah, so our recovery is in line with our National Probation Service colleagues. We have worked through various phases where we are upping our face-to-face contact, increasing our cohort of service users that we are seeing. We also, in line with National Probation Service colleagues, have our doorstep visits that we adhere to. We've also created a safe systems of work for our staff and our service users in terms of COVID arrangements, and that is implemented in our offices and working quite well, such as team bubbles and a safe systems of work risk assessment. In terms of our unpaid work delivery, that's obviously had to see some change and innovation during this time, and we are in our recovery phase for that. And at the moment, it's given us actually an opportunity to be innovative in terms of where we haven't been able to deliver group work sites. We've been delivering projects such as the Project in a Box project, where service users are undertaking work at home that will benefit their local communities and provide social capital and possibility of self-employment. So an example of that is making face masks for local organisations and charities. And we are progressing that work throughout our recovery plan. We've also stepped up our ETE arrangements, our education, training and employment arrangements, so that we can utilise these areas of need for our service users through our unpaid work delivery and online ETE provision. So although we haven't been able to, until more recently, where we're delivering smaller outdoor work groups, it has given us opportunity to be innovative and provide other opportunities for our service users to put back into our local community.
Thank you very much indeed. Can I go to Karen Lomer from CBH if there's anything she wishes to add to the work CBH have been doing?
Good evening, councillors. Within Colchester Borough Homes, we have changed the way that we work, and predominantly our staff are working from home. Nonetheless, what I would say is throughout the pandemic and right through the lockdown, a number of our staff have been out and about in the community. And that's been really important. We've had such vulnerable community who are looking for community contact. We've worked with partners in the police, so we've continued to deliver quite a high level of service in response to nuisance and antisocial behaviour. Our community caretaking team have been working daily out in communities, as have our community housing officers and our repairs operatives, predominantly to look out for those signs of safeguarding and reporting incidents in the community back to our relevant partners. So we have changed, but I think probably this way of working is for the better for us. And certainly we've had very positive feedback from those people in the community that we've been visiting. So there's some lessons that we've certainly learned and will take forward into the future.
Yes, I think as I said, there was no guidebook for COVID-19 before. We've all learned on the job, absolutely. Can I go to Pam Green, please, next? Any thoughts?
Yeah, certainly, and thanks very much for the time. I think the main thing that I wanted to mention, Rob mentioned in his early part of his briefing. So I don't want to start a conversation about how health has had to change in its way of working through COVID, because clearly there's been a huge shift in the way that we've delivered services. But the partners that sit around this table this evening virtually have become such strong allies for safety for our local population from a health perspective, because the associated risks of dying from COVID was not just a health related issue anymore, it became a whole system issue. And I think we saw incredible team working across Colchester and North East Essex more broadly around the safety of our citizens. And I'm really delighted that I think the relationships we've built through One Colchester, extending out into all sorts of facets of our voluntary sector, with the work that we did around the homeless people, that we managed to move very, very quickly with Karen's team. We got safety and services into those individuals from a clinical perspective, and we saw better rates of recovery with those individuals than we'd ever seen before. So we took the real positives out of the pandemic circumstance, managed to get wounds healed that people have been harboring for a very long time, vaccination, screening, all sorts of things that we'd have not been able to do with that population. And that only came about through Karen's team giving us access and also enabling other members of the health community to work with us. The IAG, I think, whilst I have yet to attend it, I think is going to be one of the strongest partnerships that we'll have to challenge and tackle the health inequalities, particularly through our BAME communities. And as Rob's already mentioned, I'm going to be the newest member of that group, and we're going to turn it into police and health. And I think that signifies the relationships and the strength of relationships that we've got in our system, not just about personal safety from crime, etc., but safety from this virus and clinical safety that we have to try to achieve. We've already had great response from our voluntary sector colleagues in accessing these BAME communities, but we need to show leadership and collective leadership into that and make sure that access into services is equal for those groups. First thing that we're doing this winter is making sure that we can get our flu vaccinations out to those groups, and we're using that group to help us communicate the best way to do that. So for me, this agenda is so linked. We're also doing a huge amount around our workforce development as an anchor organisation, and not just health organisations, but private organisations that our health workforce colleagues are supporting to make sure that we can get as many school leavers into meaningful work, which not only helps reduce the rate of crime, but helps their mental health presentations, make sure that they are healthy for the future because they have a good household income. These sorts of things are critical to the health and well-being of our community. This is all done under the auspices now of our North East Essex Health and Wellbeing Alliance, which you'll see in the briefing, the range of partners that we've got there. So I'm really, usually I sit in these meetings thinking, how can I contribute to safety? And I think COVID gave us a real opportunity to do something completely different and invest our resources that we got from central government into tackling different health inequalities and hopefully increasing the well-being of the population of Colchester.
Lovely, thank you very much indeed. Can I go to Lee Bailey next, who's a colleague of mine in a different place? But Lee.
Thank you, Councillor Bentley. Just from a children and families perspective, which is children's social care predominantly, from day one, we were actively ensuring that we continued our visits face to face with the most vulnerable children that were on our radar, obviously ensuring that our staff had the correct PPE and were social distancing. Where it wasn't necessary that we actually had to have a physical presence in the homes, we were really finding very innovative ways of working with our families, whether that was working with them in a park environment, in the garden environment, or taking dogs for a walk, or using the fantastic technology that we're all very familiar with now via Skype, WhatsApp and various other sort of mediums to communicate. what we found is that it's been really effective in engaging our families in that, and we were quite concerned that possibly we might lose touch with them, but it's actually enhanced our working with them through these mediums. So there will be elements that we will continue moving forward with the use of technology to support the work we do. If I can also refer to our commission services, our early help preventative services, absolutely, they've had to pull back from face-to-face delivery of services, but again, using innovative ways in which they've engaged with young people and children and families, they've managed to maintain quite a consistent approach to supporting those. I think it's reflected in what we're not seeing coming through the front door. As of September, we were expecting a huge spike in referrals coming into the services when the schools were back. We're 2.5 weeks into that. We've not seen that dramatic increase. And I'm hoping that's down to the fact that our commission services, the voluntary sector services, our wider partners have been holding that line over the COVID period.
Lovely, thank you very much indeed. I'm very grateful. Now, I've gone to all the external partners. We have heard from CBC colleagues on other matters, but are there any others that wish to come in at this stage? You don't have to, but if you'd like to, please just unmask yourself, come on to the camera. No, okay, thank you. Can I thank all of the contributors there? That was a great question, by the way. That's why I did bring all our partners in there. Do you have anything else before I go to Councillor Barber?
I need to say thank you very much for all those answers. Are really, really good answers. I think gave us a fantastic picture.
Yeah, it certainly did. It was a good question as well to ask. Thank you. Councillor Barber, you are the final person, but I will do a final swoop again.
Thank you. It's just to pick up on a comment Councillor Lilly said, which seems a mild change in policy in regards to reporting issues in your ward. It was to do with community impact statements, I believe they were called, and you refer to using them in court potentially as evidence. Just if I've understood this right, just to check, to clarify that point, because it does sort of shift the burden, shift the emphasis of how we may report things. Because, well, one, I just want to check how admissible that evidence would be, because it would probably be multiple hearsay. So I don't know whether in the criminal courts how admissible that would be anyway if we didn't witness it firsthand. And also, secondly, there is councillors who may be less willing to raise issues if they are unable to do so privately, and they would need to bring that out in court, what they're doing. I mean, a lot of the times I raise issues, they're particularly sensitive in nature, and people have asked me to contain that anonymously, how I came about it and my involvement in it. I think it's a bit of a sensitive area that I would have caution in if we were having to put our name to everything that went to court all the time, even if it was admissible, which I'm not actually sure whether it would be. Well, it could be, but I think it'd be particularly exceptional circumstances. I don't know if that's for you or Councillor Fox, so I think you referenced CBH.
Well, we'll just ask Councillor Lilly, and if there's a legal point that perhaps the Chief Inspector or policing point might pick up if needs be. But Councillor Lilly.
Yeah, it's a good question, and when I was asked to do one for the police at the town centre some time ago, I was, oh, is my name going to be read out? But then I thought it needs to show that all it is to say that something has happened and has had a massive negative impact on the community as such. I mean, I've done 3, and you haven't seen my name anywhere in the papers or anything like that. That's happened. It's just a way of backing up complaints that we've received over that. So if you feel there's a family that is burning tyres out the front, all you have to do, basically, they're asking for, is to make a statement to say that this is having a really negative effect on the community. These fires are going on. It's a real pain, and we need to do something about it. And that's all it is, basically. You don't have to do one, of course, but it just helps us, or it helps CBH, when they have to go to magistrates for an eviction of a family and such. Because 9 times out of 10, councillors say, can you get rid of this these people because they're doing this and they're doing that? Then you're basically making the statement anyway. And I think that Rob is in a better position than me to talk about law. And it really is just to back up any action that we take against it. But I do get your point about it could be quite difficult at times. But
Thank you, Councillor. We'll just briefly go to Chief Inspector. I'm sure he's going to say it's all about evidence, not about opinion. But Chief Inspector.
Contrary.
Oh, really? Oh, right. Okay.
We provide impact statements in order to support applications around our community protection notices, our criminal behaviour orders, etc. And yes, they do have to be evidence-based, but however, third party is admissible in those hearings. And it's a really useful tool to support individual applications and does save officers then having to go house to house and ask individual residents if they'd be so kind as to come forward and tell us about their neighbour who's burning the tyres, to use Mike's example. Which people are very reluctant to do. Whereas if we have a councillor that says, 15 of my constituents have come forward and told me there's this problem and this is the massive impact it's having on my community, they now feel scared in their own homes. There's a pollution impact, blah, 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 blah.
Okay.
That would be accepted by the court.
So it's quite narrow circumstances where we might have to do this then, rather than, okay.
Absolutely.
I think probably just the other question is around anonymity, Chief Inspector, that whether a councillor could retain anonymity and still put that statement in, or would they have to be identified?
They're identified in court, but generally the hearings are closed hearings anyway. And the person's not present either.
Right, thank you very much. That was very good of you, and thank you for doing that, and thank you for answering the question. Can I just double check, are there any more burning questions from any members of the panel? Please raise your hands if there are. And if there are not, then can I just say to all of our guests tonight, but maybe particularly Chief Inspector Huddleston has answered a lot of the questions, but actually everyone's taken part tonight, which I'm really pleased about. And Pam Donnelly, our lead officer, but also to other officers in this call as well. This has been a both informative and fascinating evening. I think probably the crime disorder panel is one of the highlights, the scrutiny thing, because we do something very different and it's a chance to bring all our partners together and hear from them. So can I thank all of you? I will be writing to you to say that as well, but thank you very much indeed for coming along and giving your time. And with that, I shall close the meeting. I shall just ask Mr. Howell to hang on the line 1 minute with me. And the rest of us, we just have to do the obligatory Zoom wave as we say goodbye. Very good evening to you. Bye now.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all.